Hello, and welcome to the second episode of the TrueBiome podcast. My name is Ryan, and this week's guest is Ruben from the Aesthetic City. This is a YouTube channel that focuses on traditional architecture, why it's important, and how living in a beautiful city affects us psychologically and just overall our health. We dive into a bunch of interesting topics, and I know this may seem like it's out of left field and it doesn't belong in a health podcast, but I assure you that our conversation applies it directly, and it's a very fascinating conversation, and Ruben's seems like a really nice guy. So without further ado, I present to you TrueBiome Podcast with the Aesthetic City. Enjoy. Well, I just want to welcome you guys to the second episode of the TrueBiome Podcast. Today's guest is Ruben from the Aesthetic City. I know this may seem like a out of left field in regards to a health channel, but for my own personal interest, I feel in the last couple of years I've really taken an interest in how our environment affects our health, and realizing that health is more than just what you put in your body, but it's also what you absorb in your environment and the things around you. And we are many of us now living in cities full time, and the effects that those can have on our psyche, and I think just our overall health, is maybe underplayed a little bit. So I want to welcome Ruben. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you. Yeah.
I don't know if you want to just give a quick synopsis of what your channel is, or what maybe motivated you to start the channel.
Yeah, sure. So I'm a urban planner and urbanist from my background. So I studied urban planning in Amsterdam, and then I moved on to study urbanism, which is kind of urban design, in Delft, which is a small town in Holland. And yeah, so I kind of was a bit. I felt a bit betrayed during my studies, because I expected to start to learn how to design a beautiful city, but then it turned out like it was a very abstract study, and you learn a lot of stuff, but it's not really never like, okay, this is how you build a nice street, or this is how you get a nice square. So I was not really happy with that direction, and I went in a different direction, worked for an engineering firm for a while, and then COVID hit, and I also had the possibility to work for myself for a while and do like a sabbatical. And I started thinking, I also discovered that there was a different narrative online on Twitter, Modi, about how to build cities, and about beauty as well, and about, basically discovering that there were like-minded people who also believe that beauty is really important in cities, and also, the new urbanists, people who really kind of apply the traditional urban design principles to cities, but also just traditional architects, traditional urbanists, which basically use techniques and principles that have been time tested through the ages, for millennia even, to build places people really love. And that's also the thing I wanted to study, and my interest in cities was reborn, and I felt it was important to show that this direction is actually a valid one. And there wasn't really a podcast online or a YouTube channel, so I started that, and that is what became the Aesthetic City.
Mm-hmm.
So it kind of grew out of a lack and out of a necessity to have this alternative, because all these other YouTube channels, they were mostly focused on modern architecture, and I was like, hey, there's something missing in this picture, because if you look at the research, 3/4 of people tend to like traditional architecture more than modernism. So there was a huge gap in the market, and I just kind of decided to jump into that. So yeah.
It seems to be, and again, maybe it's the YouTube algorithm kind of pushing it in my direction, but it does seem to be kind of a new wave of thought that's being kind of pushed back into the mainstream. And so a little bit of background from me. Not only am I into health, and that's been a huge focus of my life, I have many other things. I love making music, and I studied kind of theory and classical music, so I have that element, I guess, of tradition that I really appreciate. I majored in film, so again,
Mhm.
aesthetically, like visually, I am very stimulated. And but the reason I also wanted to say is I've done real estate for the last 8 or 9 years, and growing up in Dallas and where I currently am in Austin, majority of where I've lived and places that I've been, it's the suburban kind of landscape of
Yeah.
long, massive highway systems, especially in Texas. And very rarely do you have a centralized downtown that is walkable. And now
Yeah.
Austin is actually surprisingly more walkable than most U.S. cities. And a lot of people that I know, including my neighbor who is from Italy, this is a relatively walkable city for the U.S.
Yeah.
But it really, I guess my reason of bringing all that up is I've been around real estate long enough to kind of see the 5-story apartment complexes that are going up, but they're just kind of spread out in little pockets. There's no long-term design or idea as to how we can connect all this and make it more of a functional city for everyone. Um, what I guess
Hmm.
what do you feel? What cities in the U.S., if you've traveled here, I'm not quite sure. Do you have any cities that you feel that have somewhat taken this into consideration? Or I know that we are such a new country that it's much of the development has really happened in the last 100 years, and
Yeah.
it's as the model has kind of been designed around the car, it's really shaped the cities in that way. But do you have any experience of U.S. cities that you could see that potentially happening, or areas that you would be interested in seeing it happen?
Yeah. So I have been in Boston, and there is an area actually where it kind of feels like a European city, and of course, it's still not fully the same as in the as in Europe. But you had actually there's this one quite a famous street which is quite narrow with cobblestones even. I forgot the name, but that one was really well kind of European in a way, and you can directly see how popular that is. But there are some places where they're really developing stuff. So Carmel, Indiana is they have a really visionary major. I believe he really invests into these mixed these like kind of medium density missing middle housing, and yeah, just cycling infrastructure. So they are doing a lot. Then you have let's see. I also know of an architect who is planning to work on like a kind of little parish village in Detroit, because yeah, they have this whole plot of land which is basically wasteland. They want to
Yeah.
build this kind of a compact settlement there. But the most important thing for these developments is to have kind of uh, one vision as a unity. So it's really like a plan, kind of a form-based code. So you're not just zoning and you do some little projects left and right, but it's kind of one plan, which kind of shows like what height should the buildings be, and what materials, and to kind of make sure the end result is coherent
Mm.
and is logical, and it's kind of a unity instead of all these different pockets like you just described. So and that's kind of what the power is of new urbanism, or traditional urbanism, how I like to call it, because new urbanism is kind of repackaging old concepts and principles into well a new packaging kind of, what is it, old old wine in new bottles. I don't know what the saying is. Anyway, uh, but for the rest in the United States, I haven't traveled that much. I think if you are going to find it, it will be more like on the East Coast, and I
Yeah.
believe also perhaps. Um, oh man, what's the name again? I'll look it up. I'll find it. But this, I think. Sorry, I'm gonna Google this.
Do you know what state it's in?
Yeah, it's kind of in the southeast. It's
I
a
mean,
very,
there's
I think,
St. Augustine in Florida is one of the more. I mean, it has like an older area, Charleston.
Charleston. I
Okay.
think it's
Yeah.
Charleston. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
think.
Obviously those areas, were developed kind of first in the U.S. and you have that town center. But as obviously the further west you get, there's less of that kind of centralized development, especially when it comes to Texas. But the reason I also want to bring that
Yeah.
up is I think the connection to health with this is I think there's a, whether it's conscious or subconscious, a lack of a sense of community that lacks, I think, when there isn't actual connection within a city or walkability. And it seems that like the further spread out and separated it is, like we process that consciously as some form of separatism or not feeling like a community. And I know in one of your videos you had mentioned the book about, I think it was cognitive architecture.
Yeah.
And I don't know if there's anything from that you wanted to touch on, because I haven't dove into that. I actually wanted to buy it, and I think it was like $50. So I was thinking I'll wait a minute. But I didn't know if you wanted to touch on any points of that
Yeah.
because that to me is a very, as we know, health is not just physical, and it's a huge part of it is psychological. And I think that's maybe a good starting point to kind of introduce people to that idea.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, just to touch on your point, what you just made, one of the key things for, I think, health in city is there must be a reason. Yeah, it's walking and cycling basically. It's just physical activity, but there must be opportunity and a reason to do this, to get outside and walk somewhere. So if you can't walk somewhere because the roads are just not suitable, because it's all kind of car-oriented suburbs and everything is like an enclave, so you can't even walk to your neighbor without having to make like a 3-hour detour, then you're not going to walk. And also, if there's not kind of a reason to walk, if it's not nice outside or if it's not attractive, you're not going to go and walk. You're going to take the car and go wherever you want to go. So it's infrastructure, and it's also what does the city have to offer, and is it attractive? So those are some factors. Then, so that's kind of the planning part. And yeah, that's what goes wrong in a lot of places. So in the United States with car-oriented suburbs, in Europe with these tower in the park developments where you have just this block in with grass around it, and which was designed for health, ironically enough, because they were like, oh, if you have a lot of light and air and space, you're going to be healthier because you're going to go outside and you're going to breathe in the fresh air or something like that. Well, that's not how people work.
No.
People want to go outside when they have a reason to go outside, and not if they're, where there's social connections as well. If you have neighbors you can talk to, if you have like a cafe around the corner or like a gym further down the street, instead of, oh, you come down and you're suddenly in this this emptiness, in this void. You need to take the car because it's so boring. You're gonna want to take public transport or the car, and you're gonna not walk, and you're not gonna cycle. So but anyway, and then that's the planning part. Then we come to this this neuroscience part, which Anne Sussman in her book writes about. You just discussed, and that's about like how do people kind of react to our environments, and what's like how are we hardwired? Because we are kind of still, well, you could almost say like highly developed animals, but still we stem from nature, and we're still we still have this kind of this reptilian brain that responds to danger or cues that make us think, oh, that's a good place to survive. So we seem to respond well to natural forms, and that can come in like fractals and curved forms, water, but also just nature itself or representations of nature. If we see humans or animals represented in, for example, an ornament, our brain is kind of tricked, and it sees like, oh, we're in part of nature, we're in nature, so it's safe, it's nice, it's natural. If everything is very minimalistic, we didn't grow up in an environment where everything with like blank white walls and concrete superstructures, and and highways and huge blank walls. That's extremely alienating. So basically, her book. In her book, they have all this research. They also do kind of eye tracking research to see where do people look, and they create heat maps of where where people's gaze is drawn towards. And then you see that they want to see kind of complexity. They want to see um, like structures, and they want to see detail. And if something becomes too boring or too plain, like their eyes go around it. They actively move away with their eyes to look at faces or at edges or at. So in the design of our buildings, well, the funny thing is that with modernism, the type of architecture that came up, well, in the early 20th century, exactly that level of detail was taken away. This we started designing minimalistic, and that's exactly, it's kind of counter to our natural preferences. So we started building alienating stuff on purpose almost, and that is what has happened the last 100 years.
Something that's interesting that just came up, and I haven't really made this connection, but I feel as we move into a more sanitized society, it would make sense in a way that modern architecture is kind of a sanitized form of building, and that it's clean, it's flat, it's sharp, and it seems to be minimalist, or however you want to phrase it. But in many ways, I feel that it's a sanitized version of what traditional architecture kind of represented, with the ornamentation, with more curved structures and stuff like that. It's an interesting idea of how it kind of reflects, I guess, maybe more of a sanitized society where everything is afraid, more like avoiding of nature, in the sense of afraid of germs and
Yeah, yeah,
disease and all that. But I never made that connection, but that's an interesting concept as well.
yeah, sure. I really, that's actually a really good observation you make. I think that's exactly what they kind of wanted to achieve, this clean look, because it was all very weird and aspirational and ideological in that time when they developed these views. But yeah, the just it was a nice idea to have tested out, and I think it was part of our evolution,
Mm-hmm.
also in the sense of of architecture, that we had to pass this station. But the it's just not really practical in all climates. Like uh, a lot of this is inspiration for these clean surfaces came from, I think, Mediterranean Europe, where it was possible to have like a white surface and it would stay white. But if you're gonna build such a white flat surface in England, it's going to look really crappy in just 1 or 2 years.
Yeah.
So it kind of it was kind of, the international style was built. It was the international style. It was meant for the entire world, but it was not suitable for the entire world. Just physical reality. It did not agree with physical reality, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm kind of dumbfounded that architects are still ignoring this. This completely obvious mistake.
It seems like it's an extension, which I feel like this mindset I see in so many fields of humanity is like a transcendence beyond nature, of in many ways, I guess the attraction to modernity, or the idea of modern architecture, is it's kind of unnatural. It doesn't exist in nature. We don't have straight lines and sharp
Yeah,
corners and stuff like that. So I feel in many ways it's people's kind of attempt to be like, look at us, we have transcended nature. But it's in many ways, I feel like when we do this, all of the signs point to that's actually what we're really craving, and that we actually feel more sick or more depressed. It manifests in some disharmony with our environment, uh it kind of only highlights that our return to nature of some form, or an acknowledgement of it within our progression, is an essential aspect. Otherwise, we will, see that manifest in sickness, or
yeah,
psychologically unhappy. And I guess that leads me to kind of ask the question, because you present this, and I think it's probably the most valuable question to ask in regards to this whole topic. Is the idea is beauty subjective? And
Yeah.
I know that's a big question.
The $1 million question. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think taste is subjective, but beauty has a lot of objective qualities. Like I believe that. I mean, the point is, if you start asking a lot of people, like thousands, 100,000, millions, what do you think is beautiful? Then you will see patterns arise, and that has to. And those, like they will say, for example, that like kind of a dead flower is less beautiful than a live flower, for example, or that a completely gray concrete box, more people will find it ugly than people who find it beautiful. So I think we are not even doing that research. So I believe that if we were going to do that research seriously, that we would find that we could distill some information from this wide scale research. And I think it might just, maybe beauty is, well, that was also what I said in my video, that beauty is nature's way to kind of attract us from a distance. So we might be hardwired to find things beautiful. Does beauty then really exist? It's still kind of a hard question, but I believe it might. Just the thing I think is closest to beauty. I always look at organized complexity. So if you have like a scale from 0 is completely orderly, like only like straight lines, and the other side is completely chaos, so kind of static on your television screen, or wriggly lines, completely wriggly, and you can't make anything of it. Then somewhere in the middle, there's this zone where there's kind of harmony between order and complexity, and that is what seems to be like also the nature of our universe. Everything seems to be kind of I mean, we can only exist because there's some order, but there's also a lot of chaos.
Mm-hmm.
We're kind of on this balancing, we're on this balance between order and chaos ourselves as humans, but also planets, galaxies. Everything seems to be right on this kind of balancing between the two. So I think that might be the closest thing that approaches beauty. But for the rest, just looking to beauty completely from a practical point of view, and if we want to apply it, then we have to look at just studies like what do people prefer in real life, because I believe we can take really we can take stuff from there. But there is a lot of we do know that the concept of beauty is extremely important, because we use it in music, we use it in all the other arts, but in architecture suddenly it is seen like, but it's subjective and we can't use it as a thing. But I mean, in music, everybody says like, it's a beautiful song, and nobody ever complains about it. So I think that's also weird.
And to be fair, I would say from somebody who enjoys music, there are elements of kind of an appreciation for, I guess, maybe the coldness that certain types of music can now produce, because we have computers and we have such vast ability or ease to design certain sounds and all that. And again, I think it's the same philosophy, that it's taking the modern tools and technology that we do have, but then also applying these like very traditional ways of, whether it's architecture, maybe understanding classical theory and understanding music on a theoretical level at a very fundamental way, and then applying the ability of a computer and how the ease in which it can advance that sound or create a landscape that couldn't have previously been done. So I feel it's kind of very similar in that sense, that it's not to deny that we, the technologies that we have, but it's to honor the past and recognize there's a middle point where that beauty seems to really pull us, and we crave that. And I think, this is another interesting thing, is I don't know if you had touched on this with any of your videos, but is there a connection? I'm assuming there is, between a lack of beauty or the environment and higher crime, or because based on just an observational stance, it seems to be so, but I'm not sure.
Well, I have looked a bit into the research, and there's a lot of correlation. There are a lot of studies that show kind of indicate that there's something wrong with environments we would call ugly, like very monotonous environments with social housing. That's just these commie blocks, as we call them, just these completely boring stacked apartment blocks like you would find in the banlieues in Paris. I believe it's very complex because there's a lot of different factors at play. Of course, like how much oversight there is on the public space, and one of the problems with a lot of modern architecture is that it combines modern planning, which leads to verifiable unsafe environments,
Mm-hmm.
And modern architecture, which is just ugly. So if we look at places which have been designed, let's say in a modern way, but have good and safe urbanism, so good and safe planning, we take away one of the factors that influences these areas. Like in Sweden, you have some areas where they built kind of new areas, but with kind of a old-fashioned urban fabric, so kind of closed blocks with real streets, and
Mm-hmm.
but those areas are, I mean, they're almost right, but they still miss something. And I mean, they're expensive because I mean, in Sweden, Stockholm, it's just extremely expensive to buy anything. But most of the elites there, the people who really have a choice to choose where they live, they still live in the older, more beautiful, the Swedish grace areas where you have these beautiful colored apartment blocks, and even those apartments might not even be the biggest, but it's just the status of living in these beautiful old buildings. So it's I believe it has a lot to do with like the time between a beautiful living environment and your pride as a citizen, or your pride to live somewhere. Like, does that building represent who I am or my status? And the funny thing is, if you start building new traditional places, you see that they become very popular, and the housing prices do increase. There's a lot of studies about that. So, but those are kind of indicators. They're not like direct proof.
Mm-hmm.
But the proof is so strong that I almost dare to say that yes, if you build places that use these traditional architecture principles which lead to more beautiful buildings, then you would probably also reduce crime in those areas, um, and and just make people happier and perhaps even healthier, because you just see how overwhelmingly popular they are. And even with newly built environments like that, they are successful. Only it's hard to measure because those areas also make use of traditional planning, and that is really safe because there you have the oversight on the street. You have kind of not like huge skyscrapers with only one entry, and for the rest it's kind of a that ground floor. So it it's hard to say, but I'm fairly confident that you could say it's safer and it's better.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Do you think, and again, I'm kind of calling back maybe to that cognitive architecture, but I don't know if there's also studies that show, I guess, stress responses to like sharp edges and sharp
Yes.
lines and stuff like that because of maybe our hardwiring because it's unfamiliar to us and from a nature standpoint.
Yeah. So that's actually where there has been real research, like just on where they measured what is it? I think
Cortisol.
what is it? Yeah, the gland that creates it.
I want to say amygdala, but again, I always mix it up. I know it's the reptilian part of our brain.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. It's amygdala. That's it.
Okay. Yeah.
The amygdala. Sorry. Okay, so they have done research and shown that the amygdala actually produces this fear response when someone sees sharp angles, and they don't know exactly why that is, but they have just shown that that's the case. And they also have seen that people don't respond well to just like blank surfaces, blank walls, and so yeah, sharp corners. Um, and that all kind of points in a direction that, yeah, we need to really make sure what we design aligns with how we are hardwired, because otherwise you're going to get stress.
Hmm.
Because if your amygdala is just like firing and making you fearful when you walk across the street, it's not going to be healthy. So if you really want kind of holistically healthy environments, we also need to make our cities more beautiful. And yeah, to prevent like these sharp angles. I mean, there's so many modern buildings that use sharp angles to make a statement, or like these pointy balconies, or and I think even just but that's just my own thought, is that like if something is too square, it also kind of becomes quite pointy in a way, because we don't see that much in nature.
Hmm.
There's always there's always kind of something going on, like some curve or some structure, even in rocks. The best thing I think is to, if you are going to build, make sure that something looks also kind of solid and has kind of a wider foundation and grows lighter and smaller towards the top, because then we also are assured that that building is not going to collapse. It's not going to kind of tumble, because we are used to things that are kind of pyramid shaped are more structurally sound than the other way around. So those are all things that show through in the research, and I think we should take that serious.
And I it brings up a point of which something that I have realized for myself when in regards to health is it's easy to mix up the signal of stress with, you know, interest or I guess what I'm trying to say is, we can easily trigger a fight or flight response with caffeine and things like this. And hey, I'm the first person to stand behind coffee. I'm not saying, stop caffeine, but it's easy to convince ourselves that we have energy or that we're being stimulated by something when it's maybe more of a cortisol stress response than that natural uh, stimulation from something very beautiful or nature. They're different feelings. And, when you go out in nature, you get that boost of energy because of the fresh air and the sunlight. That feeling is so much more rooted and less stimulating. Whereas I guess I'm just kind of pointing to the fact that I feel because we are in such stress environments, and especially in the US with not only the mindset of business and kind of hustle culture, but the actual environment itself, I think we mix the two up sometimes, that there is a difference in maybe modern
Yeah.
architecture is kind of stimulating because it's in many ways a stress response, and we don't actually realize that it's not a calming energy that's being put back into us or that is giving us a sense of connection. It's actually just the triggering of like a cortisol response or a stress response that's
Yeah.
maybe making us think, oh, this is very engaging or stimulating.
It's a very, very interesting point you touched upon. So it's kind of the difference between, oh wow, that's impressive and cool, versus, oh, that's beautiful. And that's there's a interesting one kind of in the field of aesthetics and beauty. And there's another type of beauty that people sometimes talk about, and that's the sublime. And where beauty is rooted in positive emotions, the sublime was, I think, in the 18th century was recognized, or even the seventh, no, I think the 18th century was recognized as another experience of beauty, but one that was kind of grounded not in positive emotions, but in kind of overwhelmingness, or or fear even. And it's kind of the beauty of like a yeah, like a huge thunderbolt destroying something, or
Hmm.
immense spaces which are kind of way too big for to kind of enjoy, but they kind of they are, yeah, they impress us. But and that is kind of a, yeah, that's what is called kind of the sublime experience. And it's not necessarily, yeah, so it's not a positive one, but the sublime has kind of entered in our lives because everything is nowadays, so oversized. You have skyscrapers are a really good example. They are, um, yeah, they're just way too big to kind of to relate to as a human, and they tower over us, and they kind of give us a sense of, um, yeah, of of power and hugeness. And this is, I think, where people sometimes get confused with, hey, that's, they think, yeah, they are confronted with the sublime, which is based on kind of a negative emotion, but they confuse it with beauty because it is kind of a beautiful experience in a way, but yeah, it's just a different type of beautiful experience, and one that actually gives us stress. So I think, yeah, a lot of people have written about the sublime and beauty and the differences, and I think Kant, like the German philosopher, made a whole point about it, and more. So I think that that's interesting for more the philosophically interested people, but just to bring it back to the real environment, I feel like even like some train stations, even some classical buildings, which try to keep, which are supposed to use the human skill to make them a bit more relatable. Even those can become kind of sublime, overwhelming buildings that kind of stress us out. So that's why we also should design places that are humanly scaled, so that you can really see like, hey, I feel safe here. It's not too tall. It's not overwhelming, and it gives genuinely, yeah, it's kind of genuinely beautiful, and it gives genuinely nice experiences.
Hmm. Um, do you have any cities that you really are excited to see the evolution of, like that are doing things right? Obviously, there's a lot of European cities that have that infrastructure that's been there for hundreds and if not thousands of years, where uh, you know that that has already been established. But are
Yeah.
there cities that maybe already have that are developing in a similar direction or with that in mind? I know you had pointed to the evolution of, I can't remember the name of the small city in France
Oh
that
yeah, yeah.
uh,
Le Plessis Robinson. It's like this little, yeah, border town of Paris.
mhm. And I guess to see that example and to see how the city went from kind of a sterile, empty place to now being a highly desirable town to live in. Do you see any other places doing that, or maybe just more emphasis on that town and what they did right?
So you have some cities that are rebuilding, like for example, Dresden in Germany. They're still rebuilding after they were severely bombed in the Second World War, by the Allies, by the way. But and probably rightfully so. But yeah, they lost like a beautiful city, and they are really trying to rebuild some of the beauty of that city too. And yeah, that's an interesting project. I'm also interested in like these new charter cities. You have these new initiatives like Praxis Society and, or what is it? Sorry, yeah, just Praxis, and I know some others, like, because I feel like we're also moving away from, like, or we're moving towards these interesting new developments like crypto states and
Mm-hmm.
completely new cities, which are trying to kind of create a completely new way of doing government. And I really wonder how those are going to develop. Then I kind of also I would like to see how this whole idea in Saudi Arabia, like the line and neon, these mega projects are gonna work. And I have a strong feeling they won't be as successful. But I think it's a very good natural experiment. So I say let them build it and see what happens.
Mhm.
And then I also really wonder how Dubai is going to adapt, because they are building something that is extremely unsustainable. And I believe that they have all the money and also the ambition to perhaps make a jump and make a leap, kind of a leap further, and kind of develop past that point where they think, oh, we need more bling bling towers connected by highways,
Mhm.
and see if they can perhaps build more, really nice, social, pleasant, human skilled communities. So, and then you have a lot of projects in Europe where they're using a bit more traditional architecture. But the point is, most of the cities are going in the wrong direction and not in the right one. So there are some glitters of hope. There's some interesting stuff, but there's not a lot to really look out for. But I do feel things are changing.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I've seen so Austin. I don't know how familiar you are with Austin, Texas, but it's been one of the fastest developing cities in the U.S. for the past 5-10 years, and there's just been like a massive influx of not only
Yeah,
population growth, but you know, high, large scale companies. I think obviously Tesla moved here, but
yeah,
I believe I don't know if Twitter's still not here. I'm trying to think who else is here. There's a few pretty
yeah,
large. Google moved here, things like that. Um, and to see the infrastructure growth in the last 5 years of just skyscraper after skyscraper, uh, in kind of the field that I'm in real estate, which is like leasing and kind of leasing apartments. It's
yeah,
unfortunately all these 5-story mid-sized apartment communities, but again, the quality of the build is so low, and they're inevitably in 20 years or so going to be torn down just because they're not going to fit the aesthetic, or I see ones degrading after 5 years of being built.
wow,
They're
yeah,
they're wood frame, and the maybe I would say 5% of the ones that are being built in the last 5 years are actually concrete
yeah,
structures.
wow,
So to see that is not necessarily promising, but I do point to the fact of I find it to be more of a philosophical, um,
hmm,
not a philosophical, but a spiritual lacquer. And I'm not trying to bring religion or anything into this, as I'm not even necessarily religious, but I do have kind of a spiritual view of the world, and I feel most of what I see in these cities is like an attempt to transcend our natural. Uh, I think I brought this up earlier, but transcend our
yeah,
natural like state of being, which is this kind of in between of nature and maybe disorder, or you know kind of transcendence, moving beyond nature, but it's this combination of
yeah,
both. Um, what do you feel is going to how do you feel that is going to be able to how are we able to maybe move back in that direction? Like, what do you see needing to change, and whether it's more in a field of political or I'm definitely more of a philosophical minded, like to ponder on ideas, but when it comes to practicality, I would say I hand that off to people that understand a little bit more.
yeah. Well, yeah, I think that's also a very important point, and that's kind of I see it kind of as the under the heading of kind of meaning. So, how do we places that? How do we build places that are meaningful to us, and not just spreadsheet architecture built for numbers to live in, or houses for people just seen as machines? Um, and I think meaning is like we're really lacking in meaning, and I think that's also because of kind of the scaling up of everything. So because we're more connected than ever, everything has become like you have some really big superstars, and well, actually, well, maybe it's not fully true with music, because due to the internet, everybody has found their own little little niche, which is also beautiful. But I don't know. Maybe it is also because of everything is becoming more digital. But anyway, we really crave what we used to find in church and what we used to find in community and what we used to find in perhaps like local artisans, and what local artists used to make, or maybe what the sermon provided, and now I think, of course, materialism is a factor, and in the built environment, we see that in buildings. Like, we're not building cathedrals anymore; we're building skyscrapers that are literally just copy pasted stories made of steel and glass. And even in the past, our skyscrapers used to be more beautiful. If you look at like the Art Deco towers in Chicago or New York. Um, so, and I think people really want that back. And the funny thing is, I think we're only one big reform away from that, and that is a reform of architectural education. Because if we allow people to dive into this incredibly rich history of architecture again, and to use that directly, not symbolically, but just like directly and literally, just like, hey, I want to make something inspired by Gothic architecture. There's not some architectural professor saying, no, you can't do it. Because the point is, once you start diving into that rabbit hole of traditional architecture and all those styles, they are like bathed in meaning. Like, they are built upon thousands of years of evolutions of shapes, of things like sacred geometry and those kind of concepts. And that's kind of the stuff you get into then. And everything becomes so much deeper at that point than only just trying to solve kind of a technical puzzle as cheaply as possible. And of course, there needs to be budget, and maybe technology can help us to make these more elaborate buildings more cheaply, because we need to build, of course, and it needs to be cheap. But then I think, to be able to at least be able to build like that, we need people who are skilled enough to do that. And now architecture students are not equipped with that knowledge by far. And then we also need, of course, developers who have like a long-term vision and say like, hey, if I not only develop this, but also invest in this, and I have a little bit of a higher investment up front, I can sit on this development for 100 years, and then my grandchildren can still live of it, because I'm going to make such a beautiful place that's going to be so popular and so successful that it will only increase in value. And all the developments I'm going to develop around it are also going to increase in value, making me richer and my children as well. So I think that's another opportunity there that's just there for the taking. And
that's a very foreign concept right now. I feel that way of thinking is so eradicated or just removed from most people's awareness, is the idea that building or doing anything for the future generations, I feel that is kind of a lost art. And even for myself, I notice that I tend to not think in that direction of what I want to build for not just myself, but future generations. And I think that's a huge component of it as well, is a recognition that it doesn't have to be just for us. And, with beautiful architecture and stuff like that, it's not a quick job, even though technology, I think, has made it a lot easier. And in some ways, we aren't that far off of completely shifting the landscape of a city due to our resources and the ease in which we can build things now. But I think the idea of looking at beyond just ourselves is a huge component of it as well.
Yeah. And another thing is, so there's also a lot of misunderstandings about building more beautifully, like that. The expenses, for example, are often in just a little bit of extra decoration on the outside. Of course, if you're going to build something out of concrete, it's going to be more expensive. But I mean, here in Europe, it's more that, we don't really do a lot of wood framing here. But in like the late 19th century, most of the ornaments were mass produced. You could just buy them really easily through these producers who made them quite cheaply. And nowadays we even have like 3D printing, and we have CNC machines and other types of technologies to make it even easier. And yet things have become more standard and uglier. So, but yeah, as you said, it's extremely important. I think also for meaning. If you want to build something that stands for 100 years, what you want it to say something. You want it to have to convey your values. You want to convey something for eternity. So then automatically it becomes more beautiful, and there's going to be more value in this building than if you just build it for for 5 years to make a spreadsheet that works. So
Mhm.
everything kind of touches, and then there's all these opportunities, in mass production and using automation to make it work practically as well.
I find it very similar to the kind of the situation we find ourselves in with um, where medicine is, and I'm not a person to be like I'm completely against pharmaceuticals, and I'm not 100% in naturopath medicine either. I think like combining the two and finding the value in both and recognizing they both have their merits, and I think it seems to be at least a recognition of where we're at with architecture is it's not to throw out all practices that we've built up in the last 100 years, but it's to bring in with more purpose. Like what is the aim for doing this? What is the aim of medicine? It's to heal the body and to find harmony with the body, and that's an acknowledgement both in the natural processes that the body is in, but it's also a recognition that we can manipulate that and actually heal it with more of a pharmaceutical approach or more traditional medicine approach. But you have to have the foundation, which is the natural understanding of what the human body is, how it functions, and what it desires. And in many ways, I feel like architecture is just a psychological extension of like our bodies. It's a bigger body that we live within, and that should be an extension of that same kind of concept, that recognition of both of these, that there is modernity that can be applied, but also what is the purpose of it? Like, what is the natural state in which we function or harmonize most, efficiently or feel most at home with?
Yeah.
And I guess that's maybe why I'm so fascinated with your channel and kind of this new wave of kind of returning back to the old with new eyes.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like food is our medicine. If you eat right, you can prevent a lot of health issues. I think cities are kind of perhaps the next step. If we build cities that uh, I think it was actually those blue zones where people lived much longer, was all due to community. It was
Mm-hmm.
all due to having family close, and neighbors who watch over your children, and just being happy, surrounded by people that make you happy. And so building communities is extremely important for health, like our food is. So I think it's kind of the next step in our evolution, kind of, to acknowledge that and build places that are not only beautiful but also just better for us as humans. So we need to really start turning stuff around.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you for coming on. I don't know, not to put you on the spot, but if you have any closing statements of what you would like to put out there, also just to anything with your channel, this would be a good time.
Yeah, I'm just really happy to have been on, and thank you so much for inviting me. I think the links will probably be provided, so
Yep.
yeah, check that out if you're happy. But yeah, it was a pleasure to be talking to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Ruben.
Thank you.
I'll see you.